This is a continuation of the midterm review. This video will walk you through questions 11 through 15. So let's get started. Number 11 is an inequality, and it's kind of a between inequality. Again, as I've mentioned, these are kind of two problems in one, because you have a problem kind of at the beginning, but then you also have one at the end. So you have kind of a front end as well as a back end problem. But the neat thing is you can work it all at one time. And so ultimately I'm trying to get the x, which is in the center of the problem, by itself. So the first thing that I need to do is get rid of this division by 6. And so to do that, I'm going to multiply the entire inequality by 6. And I'm going to write that out for you. So negative 8 times 6 is less than 4x plus 2 over 6 times 6 over 1 is less than or equal to 3 times 6. And then I'm going to work through the math. Okay, I'm going to go back and do the multiplying. I have negative 48 is less than the 6 in the denominator and the 6 in the numerator divide out. And I have 4x plus 2 less than or equal to 18. Again, my goal is to isolate the x in the middle. So I need to subtract 2 from the front end as well as the back end. So I have negative 50 less than 4x less than or equal to 16. Again, keeping in mind I'm trying to isolate the x. I need to get rid of the multiplication by 4. So I'm going to divide the front end and the back end by 4, so that ultimately I have negative 54 less than x less than or equal to 4. Negative 54s in terms of a decimal, which would be negative 12 and a half, I believe. Let's see. Negative 50 divided by 4 on my calculator, yes. So decimal wise, you would have negative 12.5 is less than x less than or equal to 4. I converted it to a decimal because on the midterm, you're asked to write the answers either in terms of whole numbers or a decimal with 2 places. So this has got to be written in interval notation. The negative 12.50, since it specifies 2, is not included, so we use a parenthesis. Then we have a comma, 4, but the 4 is included. So there's the interval notation. Next, we have an equation that is a quadratic, and I recognize it as a quadratic because it has the exponent of 2, and we've talked about it several times that when you have a quadratic, you have really 2 options in terms of solving it. You can either factor or you can use the quadratic formula. In either case, with either method, in order to work through it, you have to have the equation set equal to 0. This one is not, so the first thing I'm going to do is set it equal to 0. And I'm going to do that by adding 6x and adding 3 to each side, so that I end up with x squared plus 6x plus 3 equals 0. If I think about factoring and I look at this problem, I don't know of a number that will multiply to 3 and then add to 6. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to use the quadratic formula, which, if you don't recall, and it is on the formulas listed at the beginning of the midterm, I have opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now remember that the a is the coefficient in front of the square term, which is an understood 1. The b is the coefficient in front of the x, and c is the constant. So I'm going to basically plug and chug into the formula. So I have x equals opposite of 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3 all over 2a. Then I need to work through it. So I have negative 6 plus or minus the square root. 6 squared is 36. Minus 4 times 1 is 4 times 3 is 12 all over 2. Then I need to do the subtraction under the radical. So I have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 24 all over 2. I then need to simplify the radical. So it becomes negative 6 plus or minus 2 on the square root of 6 all over 2. I notice that I have a common factor of 2 in the numerator, so I'm going to factor it out. So I have negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 6 all over 2. Since I have a 2 in the numerator and a 2 in the denominator, they will divide out, and my final answer is negative 3 plus or minus square root of 6. Number 13, we need to add and simplify. But to add fractions, remember, or rational expressions in this case, you have to have a common denominator, which I do not have. And the way to find that common denominator is to factor the denominators that you do have. So if I begin looking at factoring the denominators that I do have, in terms of the first fraction, x plus 1 is already factored and is as simple as we can have it. In the second fraction, we have 3x plus 4, and the denominator factors into x plus 1, x plus 5. So hopefully you can visualize at that point that your denominator in common would be x plus 1 times x plus 5. So I need to rewrite the fraction so that I have that denominator for both. So if I'm going to add x plus 5 in the denominator of the first fraction, if you add it in the denominator, you have to also add it in the numerator. Essentially, you're multiplying by 1. So now that I have a common denominator, I keep the denominator and I add the numerators. And I'm just going to visually show you that I'm going to add those. X times x plus 5 is going to be added to 3x plus 4. And then I'm going to go back and do the math. Okay, so in the numerator, I would have x times x is x squared. X times 5 is 5x plus 3x plus 4 over our denominator of x plus 1, x plus 5. And then finally, I need to combine like terms on the top. And I have 5x and 3x that are like terms. So I have x squared plus 8x plus 4. In the denominator, I have x plus 1 times x plus 5. I could try to simplify that, but I don't believe the numerator factors, so you can leave it that way. They may also go ahead and multiply the denominator back out. If we multiply that denominator back out, it would be x squared plus 6x plus 5. Oops. Okay. So again, it's multiple choice, so be aware that that can be written in different formats. Number 14 asks you to find the midpoint between 2 points. And the midpoint formula is on the list at the beginning of the midterm, but here it is again. It is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, because you're looking for the midpoint or the halfway point. Y1 plus y2 over 2. Again, be careful here because you have to add the numbers together first. I like to label things so I don't get confused as I go to plug and chug. So the first point is x1, y1, and the second point is x2, y2. It really doesn't matter which one you make the first one and which one you make the second one. So then we're going to plug and chug. So I have 3 plus 4 over 2, and I have negative 11 plus negative 7 over 2. If I do the math there, I have 3 plus 4 is 7 over 2. Negative 11 plus negative 7 is negative 18 divided by 2. If I simplify those and write it as a decimal, 7 halves would be 3.5, and negative 18 divided by 2 is 9. So the midpoint would be 3.5, comma, negative 9. They could also write it, if they don't write it as a decimal, it could be written in the fraction form. You would have 7 halves, comma, negative 9. Again, multiple forms for the same answer. Finally, the last question says, find the equation of the line passing through the ordered pairs. Okay, so what you have to remember here is, in order to write the equation of a line, you need two things. You need a point, which you obviously have because you've got two of them, and you need the slope, which I do not have, but I do have enough information to find the slope. Because if you'll recall, the slope formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So since I have 2 points, I can determine the slope between those 2 points. Again, I like to label my points. So this would be x1, y1, x2, y2. So I would have negative 7 minus 9 over 3 minus a minus 5. So that gives me negative 7 minus 9 is negative 16. 3 minus a minus 5 is 3 plus 5, or 8. So that simplifies to negative 2. So now I have calculated my slope, which is negative 2, and I have a point, and you can choose whichever one you want. And we're going to substitute into point slope, which is y equals m times x minus x1 plus y1. So when I do that substitution, I have y equals negative 2 times x minus, the minus 5 makes plus 5, plus 9. And then if we want to put that into slope-intercept form, we have to go ahead and distribute and collect like terms. So I would have y equals negative 2x minus 10 plus 9. And that simplifies to y equals negative 2x minus 1. So the equation of the line written in slope-intercept form, this is slope-intercept, is y equals negative 2x minus 1.